Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leaders series, Creating Sustainable and Connected Cities of the Future. My name is Simon Koga, and I'll be your host for today's session. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures, and to elders past and present. To get started, I'd like to also acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, Arcadis. Arcadis is a global design and consultancy firm providing a range of services for natural and built assets. With expertise in design, project management and environmental solutions, infrastructure development and digital innovation, Arcadis delivers sustainable and innovative outcomes for their clients. Committed to enhancing quality of life and sustainability, they offer integrated services throughout the project lifecycle and are focused on collaboration, innovation and sustainability, enabling them to create exceptional value for their clients while making a positive impact on the world. Today, we will hear from our keynote speaker, followed by a panel discussion and audience Q&A. I encourage you to send questions through to our speakers via the chat, which you can do at any time. I'd now like to welcome our keynote speaker, Greg Steele. Greg is the Global President of the Mobility Business Area at Arcadis. With over 6,000 people spread across 12 countries, Mobility helps transport owners, operators, and contractors deliver design, asset, and program management, as well as new mobility solutions across the world. He brings his expert knowledge of the global transport, mobility, and infrastructure sectors from his 40-year career to his role at Arcadis. Greg is also co-chair of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's Transport and Mobility Pathway, reflective of his passion for decarbonising the infrastructure sector. He is also chair of Engineering Aid Australia. Please welcome Greg Steele.
Thanks for the introduction, Simon. Hi, I'm Greg Steele. I'm the Global President of Mobility for Arcadis. For those who don't know Arcadis, a little bit about us. So we're 36,000 people globally. We have three main business areas. So mobility, which I head up, resilience, and places. We exist to serve our clients and assist them to transform to a sustainable future. Today, with the subject of being sustainable and connected cities, I'm going to draw upon our work over the last almost decade, where we've produced a Sustainable Cities Index. As you can see, the countdown is on globally to really try and reduce our impacts. The Sustainable Cities Index has some fascinating results and outcomes which I'll draw on. This is a picture of Fifth Avenue, New York. I've recently been in New York. We're doing a piece of work to turn Fifth Avenue into a Champs-Élysées type boulevard. The main purpose is to really pedestrianise, activate the precinct, but also lots of tree planting and greening as it gets quite hot in summer in New York. So they're looking for a better way to ameliorate the impacts of heat. Our Sustainability Cities Index has focused since 2015 on three main pillars of planet, people, and profit. There are 67 KPIs that we use here, which you can read at your leisure. But the large amount of data that we've collected has enabled us to develop a fourth pillar on progress, and we thought really checking whether a city is putting their money where their mouth is and moving the sustainable agenda forward. And I've just been in quite a few of these top 10 cities over the last 2 months, being Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Berlin. Fascinating to see the progress of those cities. You can see that It's a mixed bag when it comes to US-based cities. We're not particularly public transport focused. And the Australian cities, which I'll bring up next, are around the middle. So Perth coming in at 25, very strong on the profit element, having all the mining companies there. It's advancing quite well as far as pollution goes as well, even though it is still quite high. It is on the improve. Melbourne and Sydney, very close together. Affordable housing is the key element that holds these cities back. Lots of really good green space in Melbourne. The recent, the commitment and investment in public transport between the metros in both Sydney and Melbourne will advantage these cities coming into the next decade. They're quite new at the moment and hasn't had enough time to really shape that change in travel behaviour. Brisbane at 38, affordable housing, once again, a major issue. Quite good green space, a commitment to growing its public transport with the busways, bus rapid transit, the metro, cross river rail. This will pay dividends into the future. And a very strong Queensland Climate Action Plan and Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan seen as quite advantageous there. Fair to say, with all those Australian cities, similar challenges. So what we're seeing is recommendations on moving these cities forward is climate adaptation and resilience strategies. Very clear. Their plans are there or thereabouts, but a stronger commitment. I was recently at New York Climate Week, and a big takeaway for me is many cities and countries taking a much more pragmatic view now. The climate change has increased natural disasters and lots more effort going into resilience strategies while still trying to decarbonise. Improving air quality and quality of life through green infrastructure. I gave that example of Fifth Avenue in New York. We're also working in Paris on quite a few greening projects within the city. The main car park in front of the town hall there, replacing the top two levels and replacing with a significant park. So many of the big cities in the world putting effort into this. Transitioning to sustainable transportation, and I will talk about this following. Of course, adoption of renewable energy, engaging communities and really shaping travel demand and behaviour in different ways, and collaboration amongst all those cities with global practices are seen as a great way to go. There is a challenge, of course. I think I see the European Union and Europe generally providing the best and most progressive approach. This is quite a recent study through the EIT, Urban Mobility, which is co-funded by the European Union. This is quite recent results showing that 1.5 trillion euro of investment is required by 2050 to achieve the goals set by the EU's Green Deals. The most efficient method to reduce emissions is to really blend supply side measures and demand side measures. As you can see there, EVs can cut emissions significantly, but more needs to be done. And really this fourth dot point, the key is still public transport. We see that time and time again in major cities, and a commitment to transit, public transport, shared mobility, low emission zones, bringing in taxing of high emission vehicles is increasing car parking costs. We're seeing this in many cities around the world, so both sides of that equation really working. The benefits seen in moving to reducing emissions through urban mobility is 60 to 150% higher than the cost. So a phenomenal return on investment there. And a really big one for me, and when it comes to ESG, focusing on the S side of that acronym, shifting to active travel modes can lead to significant health savings per capita. In fact, over 1,000 euros per person. And one of the main aspects of that is reducing traffic fatalities by up to 70%. So some enormous benefits there. So a way to go in Europe, which is I see as the most advanced. So all the other regions in the world really should take a feather out of the cap of Europe here and follow with some similar initiatives. Now to an example, practical example of how this is working. And I'm going to go back to the Netherlands again. This is in the town of Utrecht. They're a reasonable sized city, rapidly growing. They need new places for living and working. Density is there already, but they're looking to increase that and transforming an existing area. It's owned by developers already. We're looking at 250 shared car parks, and this project, they're well down the path of establishing a PPP, private public partnership, and where the local municipality, the developer, and the car operator will take a share, where the community there can share in these vehicles. The objective is to decrease the need for mobility and support active mobility. So some very high quality bike infrastructure, car-free in a city, and parking for cars only at the edge of the neighbourhood. And this enables modern living. Right at the edge of this are two logistic hubs. They're combining mobility services with logistics. The likes of Amazon, etc., will have their facilities there where packages can be dropped off. Large-scale car parking will be provided through that shared facility in the PPP I spoke of before. So quite an advanced thinking here, and in adoption, where we're really looking at the best of land use, transport, infrastructure, and really trying to, and both sides of the equation of supply and demand. So just in summary, as you can see, there's plenty going on in the world. In my recent travels over the last few months, I see a real commitment to sustainable, thriving and connected cities and communities. Each country, including Australia, is progressing well, but the key message is we really need to put the pedal to the metal. We're finding in a much more pragmatic approach now. Everyone is now seeing that it's quite difficult to hit their net zero carbon goals. And so we're seeing a doubling of effort around the world. But this pragmatism is, unfortunately, the reality of natural disasters and issues is requiring a lot of funding to be hived off into protecting and making networks more resilient. So it gives me hope. I see great progress around the world, and I look forward to further discussion shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg, for your presentation. We'll now be moving along to our panel discussion, and I'd like to welcome our other panelists. Firstly, Mary Haviland, Senior Technical Director, Transport Planning and Advisory at Arcadis. Mary is a consulting executive with nearly 30 years' experience in successfully delivering transport planning services in Australia, the UK, and internationally. A Fellow of Engineers Australia with dual qualifications in town planning and civil engineering, she is a Senior Technical Director in Transport Planning and Advisory at Arcadis. Connected to both the private and public sector, Mary is cognizant of current policies, governance, and future-proofing strategies in the urban environment and transport industry. She has written policy, strategy, and research papers and presents widely at conferences and industry events throughout Australia and internationally on movement and place, city shaping, and future mobility themes. Welcome, Mary. Next, we have Ludo Campbell-Reid, General Manager, Business Economy and Activation for the City of Melbourne. Ludo joined Team Melbourne in early 2024 as General Manager, Business Economy and Activation. Ludo has a Master of Arts in Urban Design from Oxford Brookes University and a BA with honours in Urban Planning. He has extensive executive experience across state and local government, as well as the private sector in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and the UK. Ludo has previously worked in economic development, investment attraction, mega projects, major events, and a range of city-shaping urban transformation programs. Welcome, Ludo. And finally, Kate Dundas, Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network, Australia. As Executive Director, Kate leads a team of experts across the fields of business and human rights, environment and climate change, anti-bribery and corruption, and sustainable development. Kate has experience across the public and private sectors in sustainability, strategic foresight, strategy and city planning. She holds degrees in industrial design, landscape architecture and urban design, and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, Krannalama Centre for Ethical Leadership, Harvard Executive Education for Sustainability Leadership Program, and is an Executive MBA candidate. Welcome, Kate. In today's discussion, we'll be addressing some key issues in innovative technologies and digital transformation, new mobility solutions, integrated planning and connectivity, as well as some key challenges and future perspectives. Okay, so now I'll kick off the discussion with an introductory question for all our speakers. Simply, what do sustainable and connected cities mean to you, and why is it such an important topic? I might kick off with Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I mean, it's the future. I think we're at such a crossroad globally in trying to keep below the 1.5 degree increase. Mobility has such an important place and hugely important in cities as we urbanise globally. And I see mobility being right at that pivotal point between environment and social and that connection of people. So for me, and I'd like to upgrade the word sustainable too, to thriving cities. I think if we can achieve that, then the world's going to be a better place.
It's Greg. Kate.
Thanks. A sustainable city is not only designed for today's needs, but is built to adapt and support generations to come. So a place where people can access safe, affordable housing, reliable public transport, active transport, but also a place that has clean air and green spaces and neighbourhoods where everyone feels included. A city connected to the natural environment and mindful of its ecological impact, and a place that understands the interdependence between urban spaces and the natural world. So places that really embrace nature rather than replace it. And also places that embed and reflect Indigenous thinking and leadership. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And at our conference last week, Dean Sanders was talking about 7 generations thinking. So all of the decisions that we make today, thinking about how do they impact not just our own kids, but the next 7 generations. So that really long-term thinking is important as well.
Ludo?
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me and allowing me to be part of this. It's a great question and so fundamentally important. With over 50% of the world's population living on only 1% of the world's surface area in cities and sort of urban settlements, and consuming somewhat, I think, 75% of the global energy and emitting 80% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. The way we plan, the way we design, the way we construct, but also the way we govern cities will likely determine the future of the planet. So this matters. And so the words sustainability and connectedness, those themes are really at the epicenter of our collective endeavor. The more connected we are, the less we use transport, the less energy we use. So, really going down to some real basic concepts around walkability. And by 2050, we're talking about 75% of the world living in cities. So we really truly are in the century of cities. And that concept of sustainability and connectedness is both a physical and a sort of psychological thing as well. It operates at all scales, from metropolitan level right the way down to the street or the neighborhood. So really any elements of planning and transportation systems that can drive connectivity and cohesion, I guess going back to the concept of it takes a village to bring up a child, really sits at the epicenter of what we're really talking about in terms of sustainability and connectedness. And yeah, so there's a few thoughts there.
Thanks so much, Ludo. Mary, over to you.
Jeepers, making it tough standing on the shoulders of giants with those definitions. To add, though, to what everyone's said, I also sort of break it down into, first of all, what a connected city is, and then what a sustainable connected city is. I think for me, a connected city really is a community which can access what you need when you need it. And an example for this is exactly where I live. So I'm an hour outside of a capital city, but the local high school doesn't offer the subjects you need if you wanted to get an ATAR. So it means 2/3 of high school age kids where I live in my local government area travel over an hour a day if they want to finish high school. I live in an area where there's no bulk billing GPs. We have one public hospital in the whole of the south of the state. So we have a community which is really highly transport dependent. And what it means is that, like, local access to good jobs, schools, health, commercial, leisure opportunities, access to all of this would reduce transport dependency and increase our transport choices. And so really, to me, a connected city would be a city of choice where I can choose to do these things. But I think the trick is to make it sustainable. So I take it back to the same definition as Kate, that Brundtland definition. How can we meet the needs of today's community of a connected city without compromising the need of tomorrow's city? And I take it as the responsibility of a planner to ensure that this happens. We have to provide the voice for the people who aren't in the room, which is tomorrow's community. But in practice, as Ludo spoke of, our choices and plans sometimes require compromise for today's community. And this can make it really tough because I think for a lot of people, sustainability is seen as a luxury. They're just trying to get to work, get a roof over their head, feed the family, and have a bit of a laugh. And to meet their baseline needs of today, they have to do that before they can start worrying about how their kids are going to do it tomorrow. And we're seeing this played out in politics right across the world. As that gap widens between those who have choice and those who don't, then the sustainability actions also become more divisive. So I think that to address sustainability and create connected cities, the first thing we need to do is be looking at bridging equity and access in our communities.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. Just in picking up a potential theme of how we achieve that in innovative technologies and digital transformation, for example, Ludo, a question for you. What role do you think does data analytics play in urban planning and the implementation of sustainable practices in Melbourne?
It's a really great question, Simon. It's perhaps good to perhaps answer that in two parts. I understand that the planning profession is one of the lowest users of digital and data and technology in terms of making decisions, in terms of the work that the planning profession does. If you think about the work that the transport engineers and traffic engineers have undertaken over the years, the modeling of cities, the modeling of movement, we haven't really modeled cities in any very sophisticated way. That, however, is changing. In the last 10 years, I've seen a dramatic shift in the way in which we make different decisions, the way we gather data, the way that we utilize data. But it's certainly not something that has been part of the armory, I guess, to date. And so we're often second best in the arguments when we're trying to drive for that question around equity that was just mentioned. So we've really got to would utilize the new data components. And so, but I have seen, if just using City of Melbourne for an instance, there are incredible technologies that are available now. If you think about the work that Jan Gehl and the public life surveys have undertaken with many cities all over the world, really trying to understand the qualities and activities of what public life offers. The work that Space Syntax does in terms of the modeling of movement and the links between movement and economic development, and Bill Hillier's Space Syntax models have started to become very much more sort of business as usual in terms of the work that we do. Here at the City of Melbourne, we use all of those programs. We also have CCTV, which captures and models pedestrian activity and monitors movement across the city and allows us to be a very data-driven decision-making organization and capturing flows of where pedestrians are moving and so forth. And really the skill is of the urban planner, the urbanist, is to bring all those components together to build better, more resilient cities. And so it's really important when we bring those together to utilize data in a more explicit way. Bringing in the community, bringing in their insights, but also using data to explain concepts of city making in a more coherent and a more simple way. And really, that's some of the work that we've been doing with our economic trends analysis, looking at the way the city is moving and changing and communicating that back to the community and our customers. All those pieces are connected. And secondly, I guess, is just making sure that technology doesn't drive the outcomes. It's about technology serving the city. And so I'm really glad to see the concept of smart cities somewhat disappearing. We need to look, smart cities was really a lot of people trying to sell smart city solutions for problems that didn't really exist. And I'm really glad to see a more sophisticated approach to the way we manage. So yeah, quite a lot in that, unpacking that. But these are big questions, Simon.
They most certainly are. Thanks so much, Ludo. Just picking up on the notion of smart cities, Mary, how can cities leverage digital tools to enhance public engagement in sustainability initiatives?
Okay, well, I agree with Ludo that, planners can't get away with just going with the vibe anymore on a plan. I don't think that's enough to bring to the table. We know decision makers are really cardinally biased. They love an evidence base, and digital tools and big data have been game changers in being able to bring different voices to the table, and in particular to bring that community voice to the table. As a transport planner for a long time, we've been really hamstrung. We could really only count cars, occasionally a truck. They were really easy. They went forwards and backwards and they went at a decent speed, really simple to count. It's always been really hard to survey people, to understand how, why, when, what they think about their journeys and their activities in the cities. And so our data sets and decisions have always been very auto-centric in the last 50, 100 years. But as Ludo spoke of, I think big game changer has been the human tracking device. We call it a mobile phone, and all the glorious information we store on it. It's been absolutely revolutionary and been able to bring more insight into people and not just the machines in our cities, and in particular to be able to engage with people as well, and to engage with a broader group of people, not just people who are already travelling and understanding why and what they do, but also to capture the voice of those who don't travel in our cities or those who don't participate in activities in our cities, and to understand what those barriers to access are. And this really helps us in creating more people-centric solutions.
Thanks very much, Mary. It certainly has been, access to data has been, up until the advent of the public phone, is certainly, the mobile phone, I should say, quite a challenge. And leading on from that for Greg, can you perhaps share some examples of how digital technology and AI are currently transforming urban mobility and sustainability?
Yeah, Simon, a couple of examples. I was just in Rotterdam, where the northern province of the Netherlands has outsourced traffic management as a service. So we're working with a mobile phone company there and another security data analytics company we're managing about 3 million people through one small traffic control centre, but our KPIs and outcomes and our margins are governed by that regions, so safe, sustainable, smart. So a lot of AI used there to help achieve that region's net zero ambition, how we can reduce congestion and smooth the whole daily journeys for people and making it more efficient. So great example there. And then just building on a very simple one, in New York, maybe 12 plus months ago, we did a work. There are 80 odd contracts for garbage. And so an enormous amount of trips in and out of the city, Manhattan each day, which of course, if you've been there, very congested. Just through data analytics and looking at where the trucks move, we were able to move that down to about 10 or so contracts and reduce the trips by 40%. So significant through that data analytics.
Thanks so much, Greg. Thematically moving on to some new mobility solutions. Mary, how can we encourage active mobility solutions like cycling, walking to be more widely adopted in urban areas?
Thanks, Simon. I think that's one of the visions most people go to when they're looking for a sustainable travel solution, is to look to walk to cycle. But I think we need to wind it back a little bit further than that and come back to travel choice. People have to have the capability, they have to have the opportunity, they have to have the motivation to want to take up walking and cycling in our cities. It's not enough to just say, change your behaviour. And if we look at the opportunities, traditionally we designed cities around walking and cycling, and so that provided that capability and opportunity to do so. And in many of our older urban areas, like the inner areas of all our Australian capital cities, in many of those Dutch cities that Greg's been speaking about, and in some of our traditional regional towns, we have that really traditional framework. We have great bones. We have a good mix and spread of services and destinations. And so it's much easier in these areas to unwind that layer of autocentricity and encourage people to walk and cycle just like their ancestors did. I think the big challenge lies in urban areas, especially anything that's been designed post-1930, which they've been designed around the automobile. They've been designed around big distances between our destinations. And so to get that same behaviour change is much harder. It's not reasonable to ask people to walk and cycle when there's nowhere for them to walk and cycle to, because no one has that much leisure time. And so it becomes a lot harder. We need to make sure that what local destinations we do have, be it the local shops, the local school, that we're giving everyone the opportunity to walk and cycle to those places, and to design for the different age and ability groups that are making those journeys. In our own master planning projects, we found it can be really simple little tricks, put the car park of the neighbourhood shopping centre behind the building, put the building frontage on the street, and then a kid can walk or cycle to it. If you plonk the centre in the middle of a sea of car parking, that's the hardest first last mile any kid will do in trying to get to the local shop. So there's lots of little tricks we can do with the existing framework we have, but really what it's going to be about is designing future communities for walking and cycling and trying to unwind and retrofit those car-centric destinations that we have done.
Thanks, Mary. Just building on some of those design themes you speak about for car-centric access. Greg, what innovative mobility solutions are emerging that could significantly reduce traffic emissions in cities?
Yeah, there's a few on both sides of the equation, supply and demand. We're seeing some great initiatives of congestion charging, car-free cities. Of course, that has to come with the options of public transport, transit. We're working for San Diego Regional Councils on advanced air mobility, looking at the legislation and how those electric vehicle takeoff landing, what will they be used for, from the airport into the centre of cities? So we're seeing that once the technology is there to drive some of these through electric and batteries, there's a proliferation of options, and technology is booming now. So Glideways is another one, which is an automated sort of capsule in and amongst airports. Now they're looking to take on more serious transit options in cities. So the technology is really driving this, and they're building on Mary's points there, retrofitting some of these cities. The new advancements in technology might be able to see these cities retrofitted a lot quicker than perhaps we thought.
Thanks, Greg. Just considering all of that, Ludo, what steps is the City of Melbourne taking to integrate new mobility solutions into existing transport infrastructure?
Thanks, Simon. City of Melbourne's really, a fascinating place. Really, it's we're very open to new technologies. Of course, we're constantly learning, we're constantly adapting, we're constantly scanning the world for new ideas that are emerging. But at the same time, the City of Melbourne, in particular, the sort of the central parts of Melbourne are very blessed with a very incredible transport network. And I think the word network and system is something that's often forgotten. We tend to look for solutions that are sort of solely around solving one part, but the city is a connected organism where every piece is connected to the other. It's I've often talked about we should be psychologists before we are urban planners or traffic engineers, because the customer that Mary was talking about is the human being, not the vehicle. And so I see the City of Melbourne as deeply blessed with trams, with trains, with bike lanes, with tree-lined streets, with roads, with bridges, with pavements. They're all part of the transport network. And we talked a little bit or intimated about the future. London built its underground in 1836 at a time when its population was 3.5 million people. You know, London would not be the economic powerhouse that it is without its integrated transport system and its tube. It defines the brand of the city. And so Melbourne has a serious catch up to play. A city that will become a 9 million by 2050, the size of London today. And so, we're looking forward to seeing the state government's leadership in that space. We are excited about the opening of the metro tunnels, which will occur in the next year. What people don't talk about often, that's going to be 600,000 people being disgorged into the central city of Melbourne. That is the cavalry coming after many years of lockdown. That is economic lifeblood that is pouring back into the streets. I talk about trams and underground systems as fountains of people literally pouring into the street. So we're really excited to see that program lead. But as with many city mobility programs, I think it's really important to recognize that it's not so much a case of Brave New World. It's back to the future. And I think that the future of cities will be dependent on how walkable they are. And most cities ripped up their tram systems in the 1950s, all in the desire to be more progressive and build motorways out into the suburbs. And now what everyone is doing is spending hundreds of billions of dollars trying to rebuild those systems. So it's really important to not make those same mistakes and start to integrate the transport at the beginning of the planning process rather than as a retrofit. It's very expensive to retrofit cities, disruptive and expensive. So I just think there's a brave new world, not so much, but a bit of back to the future, walking, cycling, living locally, sense of neighborhood, sense of connectedness. But obviously it's a real surprise, a real opportunity for those broader suburban areas that have been built without the integrated transport system. And so we're going to have to think about technology and how they serve those communities, because they matter too. So it's a really interesting dilemma, two different speeds of programs there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ludo. That's a great summary. Moving on to integrated planning and connectivity. Kate, I have a question for you. What role do global initiatives play in promoting sustainable urban development?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to take us global rather than local for a second, and talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as we like to call them, which are a set of 17 global goals created by the United Nations in 2015. And they're part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and aim to tackle major global challenges like poverty, inequality, climate change, etc. My poster behind me, we like to think of them as a blueprint for global peace and prosperity. And they were agreed by 193 countries. And these multilateral agreements are very hard fought and hard won. So they're really important, but only 14% of the SDGs are on track to be delivered by 2030. And the SDGs matter when it comes to cities. It's important to take a holistic and broad view of sustainability, so beyond just GHG emissions. And all of the SDGs are connected, so progress on climate action, SDG 13 can affect gender equality, SDG 5, and we know gender is a major issue when it comes to cities, how cities are designed. But the key point is that SDGs apply to every country, whether it's rich or poor, and focus on ensuring that no one is left behind. And we've got issues in Melbourne, but some of the biggest growing cities are in Africa. I think Khartoum in Sudan's at 6.5 million and 6.5 million and growing. So there's huge development happening in Africa and across our Asian colleagues as well. This is a critical topic. We're facing unprecedented challenges, and urban areas consume vast amounts of energy, contribute significantly to emissions in our home, like Ludo said, to the majority of the world's populations. And the SDGs, particularly SDG 11, lay out a roadmap for cities not only to grow, but to grow wisely. And they call for cities that are resilient, safe, and inclusive. Qualities that are essential in a world where the impacts of climate change, inequality, and resource depletion are felt every day. Australian cities have a significant role to play in reducing emissions, fostering things like community-powered renewable energy and innovation around the circular economy. And in my role at the moment, working alongside Australia's leading businesses, I see the private sector driving transformational change aligned with the SDGs. And there's legislation that will drive that further in 2025. And these changes in the private sector are crucial as cities continue to grow, as many of the negative externalities of business are felt in the urban environment. Things like waste planning, flooding, heat, inequalities, and so on. So sustainable and connected cities aren't just ideal, but they're needed on a path to a just and global thriving future.
Thanks very much, Kate. Greg, considering that global context, how can global best practice in urban mobility be adapted for local context in Australia? Just picking up on some of the themes that Kate was just talking about there. If you could elaborate a bit further, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I think we're in a really good position. I mean, relatively small to medium population globally. We are growing quickly, which gives us the opportunity to build in some of these best practices. The world's much more global. We're seeing the likes of World Business Council, Sustainable Development, where Kate's involved. There's a lot of connection with private sector and government around the world that are looking at that best practice. I've seen Australia really pick up over the last few years in its commitment to climate change and adaptation and resilience through necessity. And as a nation, I think we're have a go. I really believe that we can be quite innovative and can forge ahead quite quickly. Lots of lessons learned from around the world. I'll go back to Ludo's point. I think there are some basics we need to get right, and that's a really strong backbone of public transport. Sydney and Melbourne are just getting there. Brisbane's still a long way behind. These public transport networks will reshape those cities into the future, so we need to make the most of those. And walking and cycling, as I said in my keynote, there's huge advantages there. So Whilst we're growing, we're a work in progress. I think we're in a very good position to take some of these best practices on.
Thanks, Greg. Just drilling down into integrated transport and land use planning, Mary, how does that contribute to more equitable cities?
I think it builds on what Greg's just been saying. Australia's in a really fortunate position globally. We're a really wealthy country, but our basic challenge is equity within our cities and equity in wealth, and ensuring that we share that between us. And that's at the heart of creating integrated transport. We need integrated transport and land use planning to help create those more equitable cities. It's not just financial solutions to do that. It's about opportunities and choice. As I was describing before about where I live, it's about reducing transport dependency, especially for that growing segment of our community that can't or choose not to drive, to make sure that they too have the same transport choices. And so integrated transport and land use planning, it has to be more than just transit orientated development. I think it's, as Ludo was speaking to as well, it's about systems, it's about people first and foremost, then about the places, and only then is it about the movement. And so it's really creating not transit orientated solutions, but creating people orientated solutions. And in terms of that integrated path, there's a diagram that I absolutely love and always speak to, which is Professor Peter Jones in London. And he talks about the stages of development in most of our urban areas. And it really explains that dependency between land use and transport. So he talks about, in today's world, in the first stage of development, we tend to get the private sector to build the land use, to develop the road network, and we ask the private people to bring their transport as well. And so in that first stage of development, it's very private orientated, and it's a very car dependent and car orientated policies that go with it. However, as we get a very successful area, we have lots of people trying to travel to the same places at the same time. And so we put public transport into it, and we start introducing public transport and transit orientated development in that second stage. But then we find that that can get a little transactionary and a little bit dull, just that transit orientated development. And so what we really want to do is open up within those transit spaces themselves the cities for people and for life and for placemaking and local economic opportunity. And so in that third stage, we have people orientated development. And normally we wait in a very linear format for this integrated land use and transport development. And the problem with a lot of development in Australia and in similar places around the world is we never get past that first stage. We never get past that stage where there's enough people going in the same direction at the same time of day to invest in true public transport and to invest in those public services. And it's very, very rare that we get to that third stage on the linear path of people-orientated investment from the public sector. And so I think the trick to integrated transport and land use development is not sitting back and waiting for that organic linear path to happen, but to intervene. And this is what we're seeing successfully in places like Melbourne and in Sydney, where they're making conscious decisions to come in early to activity centres and create 20-minute neighbourhoods and to put that investment of the public sector to stimulate the private sector and ensure we get that integrated solutions. Really complicated, convoluted answer. It's a complicated space, but it's all seeking to achieve those more equitable outcomes.
Thanks very much, Mary. I love it. Tods to pods. You mentioned Melbourne's doing this really well. I'll throw to Ludo. Maybe you could provide some examples of successful projects.
Yeah. Well, firstly, maybe Simon, Australians like to romanticize the bush. But we're actually really a nation of city slickers. We kind of imagine the city or the economy of the country is built on farming and mining, but most of Australia's economic growth has actually been driven by the activity that takes place in the office towers of our major cities. And so, and despite that, we don't always look to Australia for great examples necessarily of that integrated land use planning. We have significant challenges in Australian cities around the. We're seeing if you read, there's a really good piece of work by JAL a few years ago, produced by the Committee for Melbourne with Business of Cities. Really a tale of two cities emerging as the high density, more medium density, smart density of green space and open space is connected with transport links of the inner city suburbs of our cities. But then as you get broader and further out from the centre, you start to see very much those sort of car dependent, auto dependent programs that look very similar to me like the programs you would see in a typical US city. So we've lost some of our European roots and taken on some of our more American-based planning, and that governance challenge, managing the city, is something, I guess, which I talked about in my first comment about the importance of those governance models to make this work. But we also need to not rest on our laurels. Melbourne has been luxurious in many respects in terms of it has spent the last 10, 15 years talking about its livability. But that livability needs to not be taken for granted, and it needs to move to the next stage. And there is competition from cities like Osaka, Seoul, and Kuala Lumpur doing really, really good work in that space, and also learning from cities like London. I worked for Tower Hamlets Council for many years, led the ongoing redevelopment of Canary Wharf. The stories are there for Australia to learn by, but it does need to move quickly. And I guess I would say a really exciting development over the last 6 months has been the federal government's announcement of a new Minister for Cities, and somebody who is accountable, someone who's interested in cities, is really critical to going forward. And so with the work that we do at the City of Melbourne, we don't do anything by ourselves. We have to collaborate with the state government and with also the federal government. And so for many, many years, we have been doing that. There's some really good work. The West Melbourne Structure Plan is a really solid piece of work that has been delivered by the organisation in partnership with the private sector, but really transitioning from a very industrial part of Melbourne through to a more mixed use, multi-use, open space services district. And there's also big programs we're working with the state government in terms of Arden, Fisherman's Bend, South Bank, Docklands, some of these really big, chunky parts of the city have been worked on, but everything is done in partnership with the state government. They control many of the levers, we control some, and we can't do it without them. So really that relationship is so important going forward. So whether I've answered your exact question, I think the other good piece of work is the Queen Victoria Market Programme, which is the future home to something like 20,000 residents over the next 15 years. The Queen Victoria Market Precinct, an extraordinary deep heritage component to that program, but doing mixed use development, looking for new transport links, new open spaces. The work that the organisation has done with Lendlease in their role as a primary developer has been a really good piece of work. So there are many examples, and I do believe, I suppose, Simon, I guess one of the asks is that we are better at bringing together best practice, we're bringing together case studies, explaining, having the right people in the room, like what you're doing today, having that thought leadership program. But we all need to be educated on how to do it properly. And I did spend several years working for the state government, running the planning, the integrated precinct planning for the suburban rail loop project. We took a best practice approach to that. We've used best practice methodologies from all around the world to ensure that the transport and the urban planning is being done at the same time. And time will tell. This urban renaissance takes decades, and so it's about doing that right up front and letting that program run its course over the next decades and future. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Ludo. Certainly, themes there is learning from international examples and collaboration, the complexities of which are certainly existent, and maybe that sort of lends itself into our next theme of challenges and solutions. Question for everyone. What are our biggest challenges facing cities today in their quest for sustainability and connectivity, and how can they be overcome? I'll open up to the floor.
I can kick off with one, Simon. It's in my keynote. I had a slide there. Funding. The EU, showed massive return on investment in public transit, active mobility, sort of demand side initiatives, but 1.5 trillion euro to achieve that, to hit their goals out to 2050. So, funding's a huge one. With the US election, everyone sort of throws their hands up in the air. Well, there goes a progressive sort of mobility scene in the US, but not so at the same time. Mary's colleague Jocelyn just shared that Nashville had just approved in the last week a $3 billion package, bipartisan, to improve the public transport, active mobility in Nashville. And the US have a very unique way of going about raising their funding and going directly to the community for that. So funding for me, and sort of bold action from the leaders of government in those sort of areas are key.
I could jump in next if you want, Simon.
Mary's next. Thank you, Mary.
Well, considering it's Engineers Australia and all good engineers talk to time, cost and quality, Greg's already taken cost and funding, so I'll take up timing. And I would say the biggest challenge facing cities today with their goals about sustainability and connectivity is timing. We keep signing up to some fairly long-term goals. Everyone's keen to sign up to a long-term goal because it's up to someone else to deliver it. So I think the challenge is really getting that momentum going and then to keep the momentum going to achieve it. I went and saw a local economist speak, Saul Eslake, recently, and he was talking about the importance of having interim targets that keep us on track. And I think it's why the work Kate does is just so incredibly important, that to know that the UN is out there and they're tracking those sustainable delivery goals. They're not, the SDGs aren't just being put out into the ether, but they're actually tracking how we're going. And it's been great to have our global colleagues out here last week giving us a report and saying, look, we're only on track for 15% of the goals to be achieved by 2030. Kate, please correct me if I'm wrong, instead of that 30% we're aiming for. And I want to know those interim tracking results now in 2024, not in 2029, so that we can start redirecting that path.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
Simon, maybe I can offer.
Oh,
Okay, shall I go? I'm just going to go for some really specific examples from the city of Melbourne. One of the major challenges in the city is flooding. Many of the growth areas, specifically Fisherman's Bend, sit in floodplains. So urban design in flood-prone areas is a massive challenge. And then in Victoria, we've got 3.2 million underperforming residential homes. I'm sure many of you live in one. So retrofitting that amount of homes to be places that are comfortable to live in more extreme temperatures is massively challenging, because retrofitting at scale is difficult to scale.
that's really interesting, particularly given that a lot of capital projects have a certain project development lifespan of many, many years. So tackling what's started today is built in 10 years and then it's already out of date. So that's a massive issue. Ludo, some thoughts?
Thanks, Simon. Gosh, it's an interesting question. If I said to you, what city am I? And I said to you, climate, affordability, congestion, homelessness, crime, biodiversity loss. What city am I? Probably every city that's growing in the world, and so that's not helpful, I guess. But in terms of sort of three things perhaps that I think are the biggest opportunities as well as challenges. One is the governance model of cities. There's a lot of models out there whereby you can get real traction, you can get real go forward, rather than sort of short-term political cycles. Cities don't respond well to short term. They are longitudinal. It takes decades, and understanding that and putting in the right programs in place. So I think governance models are really holding I think Australian cities back. I've worked in London, I've worked in Auckland. The creation of the super city in Auckland allowed us to do things that we could never do as 8 councils. I worked with the GLA in London, and the ability to deliver things like congestion charging and a better planning framework, a London plan. So these are things that cities like think about the Greater Sydney Commission, and there's a lot of investment in the right models of governance, and it can either take you forward and supercharge you, or it can hold you back. That would be the first thing. The second one is a common alliance. Really having a clear vision that's not just a vision of the organization or the city, but actually its citizens, and some way in which we develop long-term plans with short-term delivery, like Kate and Mary were talking about. Again, there's great models around how to build that common alliance across the sectors and across the disciplines, not taking that disciplined, functional-based approach to building better cities. And the last one probably is more complex. Even is really the fixation of Australian cities on CBDs. The word CBD does not describe what the CBD has become. The CBD should be a mixed-use city. We should have more diversity of offer, get out of the narrow models of city building and start to diversify. And so I think the changing of the rules that allow the CBD to become the central experience district of the future, rather than the central business district, is the story. And I think Melbourne particularly has a great role to play. There's a great story there in Melbourne, in Melbourne, of a city that was very much a monocentric city, where daytime workers couldn't wait to get home quick enough. It has now become a much more resilient, much more mixed-use city, and I think that's why we're doing so well in terms of our recovery post-COVID, with the lowest shopfront vacancy retail rate in the whole country. So there's 3 things there, Simon.
Thanks very much, Ludo. A question for Mary. How can public and private sectors collaborate more effectively to drive sustainable urban development and support achieving their sustainable targets?
Thanks for that, Simon. I think most importantly, both the public and the private sector need to have skin in the game. Neither sector can deliver without the other. I'm just reflecting and smiling on the comments Ludo was just making about Melbourne not being so much more than a CBD, a central business district, because don't tell Greg, but I go to Melbourne for more than just work. I consider it my playground. I consider it where I want to go and shop and catch up with folk and go see a band and do some shopping and things. So it is so much more than just business. And that only works when the public and the private sector are working together. And I can have all those wonderful galleries and shops and things, as well as having that brilliant Arcadis office sitting in the middle of it as well. How do we get them to collaborate more effectively? I think that the paths need to be aligned with their vision of what the future community looks like, and they need to be really committed to that vision. And once again, that's where targets come in, and the sustainability targets come in. And the targets can't just be put out there. They need to be tracked. They need to be rewarded. And the tracking should be on both sides. And it's why it's really important for groups like Arcadis, who independently produce that Sustainable Cities Index. It really opens up that conversation with so many of our clients and between the private and the public sector on how everyone's tracking and what we could be doing more of. And on a public side and on a global scale, it's really important to have things like the UN Sustainability Development Goals. They provide the North Star for so many companies and groups, and it's why it's really important to have people like Kate checking in on how we're doing. So I think those setting of goals and visions really opens up that conversation between the public and the private sector. There's a lot of really clever urban solutions out there that we can do together, but only when we get the timing right, the cash flow right, and the collaboration of goals right, do we actually achieve those?
Thank you very much, Mary. Just picking up on that, also those sustainability goals, Kate, how can business sustainability goals to ensure more connected urban environment?
So the question was about business, right? Well, firstly, businesses can join the UN Global Compact. We work with about 370 businesses to embed the SDGs into business strategy and operations. So, for example, when companies integrate SDG 11 or Sustainable Cities and Communities into their strategies, they go beyond profit and can help tackle some of the issues we've spoken about today, like affordable housing, open space, inclusive infrastructure. And there's other things emerging, like the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. So some of the big engineering firms are already reporting against TNFD. So businesses are beginning to understand how their operations and supply chains can impact nature and go about restoring and repairing natural resources through how they go about business. And that has an impact on cities and how people live. There's huge opportunities in clean energy and sustainable transport. As we have already discussed, cities are high emission zones, but by committing to renewable energy, and the City of Melbourne has done some amazing work in this, supporting public transport and investing in EV infrastructure, businesses can actively reduce their urban emissions, which does mean cleaner air, healthier communities, and those practical things. And equally important is adopting circular economy practices, which can help cities ease the strain on resources and infrastructure. And businesses in construction or real estate, like I mentioned before, retrofitting buildings to reduce carbon footprint is a game changer. In New York City now have a retrofit first policy, which means that buildings, rather than pulling down and rebuilding, buildings should be retrofitted. And older buildings are often inefficient, but retrofitting them can align with things like climate goals and create more resilient urban spaces, reduce embodied carbon massively, and tackle emissions head on. And as I mentioned, in Victoria, we have a specific issue with residential properties being built in like a shed, really. Collaboration is key, partnering with local governments on community energy projects or smart tech. City tech amplifies and builds urban resilience, and also by investing in underserved communities and creating fair wage jobs or a living wage. Like businesses paying a living wage into communities is really important. Businesses can then help close gaps in access to services and promote more equitable urban environments. So when businesses align with the SDGs and join the compact, they're not just building sustainable practices, but they can actually help create cities where businesses, people, and nature coexist.
Thanks so much, Kate. Just picking up on the people-oriented development that Mary raised before, and Ludo, a question for you. What role does community input play in shaping sustainable urban policies?
The community. We talk about this a lot at the city, and when you work in local government and state government, who are you serving? Who is your customer? It is the community. It is the people that rely on you to do the best job you can to build their future hopes and dreams, and so. Gosh, that sounds romantic, but it's what drives the things that we do and the decisions that we make. We work to counsellors; they make the decisions. We provide advice. We provide free and frank best advice, but ultimately it's a decision that is made by the voted officials of the city, and ultimately the community are the people that we serve, and their aspirations are those that we hope to deliver. The challenge is how to engage them. The challenge is how to engage them outside of a crisis conversation or a threat conversation. It's how to interest them in city building issues, and in a world that is deeply confused in terms of its its amount of information overload. How do we get cut through to the people that we serve? We also, in the city of Melbourne, have a large population of students who don't speak English as a first language. How do we serve the people? How do we serve the community? And so, using technology, using smart systems to bring the community into the programs. One thing I think would be really good to see is a higher use of tactical urbanism, whereby you don't build perfection of projects, you build versions of them, and you ask the community what they think before you move to the next stage of implementation. There's a real desire around the world in councils to do things perfectly, and so you get an approval and then you move through the project management framework to delivery. But what if we stopped at key points along the way and ask the community at those points, is this what you want? Do you understand the implications of this? Would you do it differently? I think there are different models that could be utilized, and we're looking at all of those here at the city. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ludo. I love the concept of tactical urbanism. I'm gonna take that. Leading on to some future perspectives, Kate, we spoke about businesses before. How can local communities engage with global frameworks, enhance their sustainability efforts?
Yeah, there's lots of ways. My kids' school, so they go to our local primary school, their whole curriculum is designed around the SDGs, which was quite surprising but pretty cool. So the kids are learning all about sustainable development. I've spoken about how businesses can be involved, and that includes local businesses all over the place. But it's also where local government can step in. And the City of Melbourne have done this really well by localising the Sustainable Development Goals. By developing, and Ludo, you can probably talk about this much more than me, it's been a few years since I was there, but by developing a framework tailored to the city's data collection, planning and governance, the City of Melbourne has produced a voluntary local review. So that's where the city is tracking their own progress against the Sustainable Development Goals. The federal government do this as well. They produce a voluntary national review. The last one was in 2018, and they're about to hopefully do another one. But it's really amazing when cities do it themselves, because they can then understand the direct impact that they're making towards the collective effort. And that counts, need a few things to be able to do that. So data is really important, and making that data open, which the City of Melbourne does really well, as do many other local governments. Really target localization, so scoping all of the SDG sub-targets to account for capacity for change and thinking about which ones are really relevant to that local context. And then prioritizing and then monitoring. So really making sure that the progress is monitored annually and the work programme around everything that the city does is adjusted annually to try and make additional progress on the SDGs. So there's lots of things that can be done at a local level in schools and local business, and that's where I think local government plays an amazing role.
Thank you, Kate. I might jump back to Ludo again now, in response to Kate's comments there. And Ludo, what vision do you have for Melbourne as a leader in sustainable urban development?
Wow, these are such big questions, aren't they? I mean, it's ultimately the vision for the city is developed by the mayor, by the councillors, in consultation with the community. My contribution is will be to assist that process and try to bring a sort of an expert, professional, urban view to that. And so I guess the comments I probably would make are. Walkability needs to be at the epicenter of any future transport program and planning program. It is the glue that connects cities and connects communities. Really focusing on that. The diversification of uses, as I mentioned earlier, the eradication of the fixation of CBD and that very narrow model of what cities are. That, as Mary was saying, they're places where we live, work, play. They're not places where we work, and so really understanding that. And you can see through the pandemic around the world, cities that are flourishing after the lockdowns are those that have a more diversified centre. Those that are struggling are the ones that have got the mono-use sort of office parks of the old 80s concept. So that's important. More families. I'd love to see more families and children in the central city, because it is a place of live, work and play and education. And as Kate was saying, more schools in the central city would be incredible. And I'd love to see sort of 1 million more people within 10 minutes public transport ride of the central city, really sort of providing that sort of economic, cultural, social lifeblood to the city. 500, 600,000 people a day come into the central parts of Melbourne. So our customers are not just the people that live within the city of Melbourne boundaries, but 600,000 people who live outside. So the last point I guess I would make is really the sort of ensuring that we start to partner across our borders, not see the black lines that define city of this and city of that, but as Melbourne, and working with our partners across the M9 councils as we do. Our CEO, Alison Layton, chairs an M9 meeting once every month or so, where they talk about cross collaboration, cross border partnerships, common projects. That's the future, is the collaboration of the future, not the sort of isolation and functional disciplinary delivery, but actually collaboration. And I think that's the only way we're going to work this out going forward.
That's very interesting. Thanks so much, Ludo. Given that context, Mary, how can cities balance growth and sustainability without compromising quality of life?
Well, I agree with Ludo. These are big, big questions, Simon, you're asking us today. Give it a go, though. I'm going to come back to the first point that I made today, which is about balancing growth and sustainability for tomorrow without compromising that quality of life today. We really need to strive for equity. And that's equity between communities, but it's also equity between generations. So what does equity mean in urban practice? Well, firstly, it means that we need to ensure the fundamental needs of all the members of our community are heard. Make sure we use all those fabulous communication analytical tools at our disposal, but also to make sure that we are listening, that we're truly listening. But then secondly, that the solutions we develop, that they're sustainable. And as an engineer, I just love a logical hierarchy or a very systematic answer. And so I loved it when I hear about there being 3 types of sustainable urban solutions. There are firstly those that are resistive, there are those that are adaptive, and there are those that are transformational. So our resistive solutions are ones where we expect to keep doing the same things and to keep travelling in the same way, but we'll make things bigger and stronger to resist all those megatrends like climate change. And that's probably not my favourite bucket of solutions. The next bucket, though, is adaptive. And so that's saying we don't expect our need for some activities, we don't expect the land use to particularly change or the need for our journeys to change, but how we make those journeys and how we get around will. And so Greg has spoken of some really good examples of the investments that are being made from the EU. That number still blows me away, in the trillions, to New York and to Nashville, and how they're investing in creating mode shift to those more sustainable modes and how we're adapting how we get around. And then finally, transformational. And this is really my favourite bucket. This is talking about we're on the cusp of this new energy, a new digital age, and our cities are going to reflect the political, the social, and the economic upheaval that's associated with this sort of disruption. Disruption can be a really negative word. Disruption can be a really scary word, but I see disruption as this massive opportunity. It's a way to change in our cities, our activities, to change our journeys, to even change if we need to make them, or change to do more of others. And I think Ludo's provided some excellent examples of his vision for Melbourne and how it's transforming post-COVID into a place which is inclusive for activities so much more than the business ones. And then thirdly and finally, to balance growth and equity, we need to make sure that we have that political will to deliver whichever path it is that we choose and to deliver those solutions. And I think that is going to be the hardest one.
Thank you very, very much. Some big answers for some big questions. Now, in the interest of time, I'd just like to conclude this section before we head on to the audience Q&A with a bit of a round table, two very quick questions. One, what is an actionable takeaway you would like attendees to remember after this webinar? And two, how can participants get involved in supporting sustainable initiatives in their own communities? Greg, we might kick off with you.
I think an actionable takeaway is collaboration, learning from others. I think we can be a bit too blinkered sometimes. I learned a lot recently at New York Climate Week, where Amazon, for instance, has become transport specialist because that's their biggest impact through Scope 3, and now they're leading the way in transport planning and thinking. So we can learn a lot from others, maybe adjacent to our industry.
Thank you, Greg. Mary.
My one actionable takeaway, it's to be sustainable. I think it's a big responsibility as planners, as urbanists and as engineers to develop solutions for communities who don't have that voice and to listen for that voice.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. Ludo, an actual takeaway.
One thing I wish that there was more of was positivity. When it comes to cities, everyone's really quick to point out all the problems, and it's like with children. If you spend too much time saying you're not good enough, or you're not this, or you're not that, you're probably right. And so, I guess as a father, and you try to get it right, but the city is more human than machine, and so there are cities which they have confidence problems. They think. The city centre is the beating heart or the brain of a city. The open spaces and the parks are the lungs of a city. The people are the blood. And understanding that this is a system is really, really damn important. And but I think positivity, where it's due, and critique where it's due. That would be be informed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ludo. And finally, Kate.
Thanks. So one actionable takeaway, every decision that we all make individually will impact on whether or not this planet remains livable. So spend your dollars wisely, and I recommend investing in an electric bike as a behaviour change device. It's the best thing I've ever done. And how can you get involved in supporting sustainability initiatives in your own community? A big issue that I see globally is polarisation, misinformation and division. So I recommend getting to know your neighbours and doing your bit to create strong communities at the local level, trying to find friends that have different opinions to you, and remembering that there's a lot more that brings us together than drives us apart.
Thank you so much, Kate, and to all our panelists. So now, as very briefly, we've seen quickly it's now, but we do have a very short opportunity to go to some audience questions. Thank you to everyone who has responded. We have a bunch of questions here. I will start. Actually, there's been quite a few questions about how we can consider green energy and residential to citywide to rooftop solar as a means of building self-sufficiency in achieving our sustainable cities goals. Would anyone like to comment on that just very briefly?
I'll happily jump in, Simon. Rooftop solar is an amazing opportunity. Solar in Australia in general is an amazing opportunity. The big challenge, as we know, is about transmission and distribution rather than that energy collection. System is set up for that sort of one-way flow from central energy generation with our houses at the end of the cul-de-sac. So it's really hard to change direction on that system. And to develop that self-sustaining suburbs and those self-sustaining cities when our systems are set up to be at the end of the road. However, I wanted to speak to a pilot program that happened down in Tasmania for an energy resilient community. There's an island just off where I live called Bruny Island, and they wanted a second transmission line because they had so many tourists coming in the summer peaks. And they said, we need more energy to the island to be able to meet these tourists. And instead, they were put on a pilot program where the government provided them with household solar and battery arrays to provide local self-sufficient communities to meet that peak period. And that overall, and then they put it together into a business case to assess the outcomes of that with the investment compared to putting another transmission line. And that pilot program is now being rolled out into other communities. So it's a great program to look to when you're looking about self-sufficient communities. The asterisks on that being that it does work better in some of the regional and more isolated areas than some of the more complex suburbs that we have when they're part of a complex city or urban area.
Thank you very much, Mary. Another question to the panel. How do you see autonomous vehicles playing a role in future transport? And why do you think there is currently no bipartisanship support for how important active transport needs to be in a sustainable city? This is from Priya in Victoria.
I could have a go. Autonomous vehicles is a really, really fascinating conversation, and no matter what comes out the tailpipe, they're still cars, and so we need to be really careful that yes, whilst the sort of electric vehicle movement is certainly a step in the right direction, the more people we can get out of vehicles and onto public transport creates more space for vehicles on roads, which allows better flowing traffic. If we're incentivizing people to get into their cars to drive, then more people will drive and there will be more congestion. So we've got to start to understand that most people drive to work, and they're often single occupancy drivers sitting in cars, whether they're powered by diesel, petrol, or by electrics. There's still vehicles taking up space, and I think the space race is going to be the future of cities. Is really understanding that the right way to move people around a city is through a fully integrated and connected transport network and system. They're all connected, and I really worry about drones and flying taxis, and can you imagine the noise that's going to be dominating our skies as everyone flies in and out? It just won't. It really worries me. I also worry that autonomous vehicles will actually increase congestion, not decrease it, as they move around the city. So I think we've got to be really careful how we step into that space and build all elements of a transport network, not just one, and they all work in a cohesive, systematic way, not individually. So there's a few points there.
I might just
yes, thank you so much, Ludo.
Yeah, I might just build on that. I agree with Ludo, in relation to cities, but in the connected element, we've got to remember freight as well. So I think the autonomous vehicles is a big solution there. In safety in particular, we're working with a startup in the US that's solely modeled on managing highways and autonomous vehicles. So far, looking at something like a 40% reduction in accidents. So we think there's quite a big safety play here, and also efficiency when it comes to highways and limiting space. So whilst the congestion in cities is of concern, I agree with that. I think autonomous vehicles can have an enormous benefit, particularly with the longer haul freight and also in a safety sense.
Thanks, Craig.
Just to say one thing, Simon.
Oh, yes. Over to you guys.
Go, Ludo.
Ludo.
I know. I just think that's a really good point, and thinking also about disability groups and elderly, being able to move around the city. Those vehicles that are autonomous are a complete game changer for them. So, as I said, it's all part of a system, not just one single solution. And we need to be very careful what we engage with.
Everyone, we have actually run out of time. So certainly thank you to everyone who put in some questions. We will certainly provide these questions to all panelists, and we'll be hopefully be able to provide a response in due course. We can contact my colleagues regarding that. But again, thank you everyone for putting in your questions, and please join me again in thanking Greg Steele, Mary Haviland, Ludo Campbell-Reid, and Kate Dundas for their time and discussion. I would also like to thank Engineers Australia's industry partner, Arcadis, for their support. Please also don't forget to look out for our upcoming 2025 Engineering Excellence Awards Gala Dinner happening in Brisbane. And if you don't mind, please complete the short feedback form linked in the description box below. This helps us plan and improve all future sessions. Thank you once again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Thought Leaders event. Thank you.